not the opening of a tower, but the sinking of a ship. 750 miles away from Halifax, the Titanic had hit an iceberg and sank on April 15, 1912. The survivors were taken directly to New York, but the bodies of the victims were floating in the ocean. The families asked the White Star Line to do something about it, and they hired boats from Halifax who would eventually find 328 of the victims of the sinking. Some they had to bury back into the sea. 209 were brought back to Halifax, of whom 59 were sent elsewhere for burial, including the American multimillionaire John Jacob Astor. The band leader of the band that had played on was sent home to England for a hero's funeral. That left 150 to be buried in Halifax, 121 to be buried at the Fairview Lawn Cemetery. In no particular order of class or crew members, they are buried with simple stones that read their name, date of death, and the number of the order they were picked out of the ocean. Some families decided to replace the small original stones with larger ones so they could put religious verses or information about the victims themselves. The crew of the recovery ship paid for the burial of the unknown child. DNA testing has revealed his identity, but the family has agreed to leave the stone as is because it represents the 53 children under the age of 10 who were lost in the sinking and whose bodies were never found. The Titanic had a couple of local connections. A lady survivor on board, Hilda Slater, was from Halifax. The other connection to Halifax was George Wright, Halifax millionaire, in his 60s, a bachelor. His body was never found, but his house in Halifax is still used for women's charities. George Wright's house is located on an avenue of fine homes in the south end of Halifax, leading towards Point Pleasant Park. Point Pleasant was established in 1866 by Sir William Young. He donated a set of gates to the entrance of the park. In turn, the city complimented him by naming the avenue Young Avenue. Every year a shilling is given to the Crown as payment for the lease of the park, originally authorized through Queen Victoria for 999 years. The park overlooks the entrance to Halifax Harbour, and it was here that people would gather to watch the convoys coming and going during World War II. You can see the islands in the harbour, lighthouses, and the arriving and departing of container ships, cruise ships, and pleasure craft. Canada entered World War I in 1914, and Halifax became a busy wartime port. 3 years later, the United States of America entered the war, and the British Naval Authority decided the safest way to get ships across the Atlantic would be to group them together in convoys. Halifax, as the closest mainland port to Europe, was an excellent choice for convoys, especially as it was ice-free all winter long. On the morning of December 6, 1917, a bright sunny day in Halifax Harbour, two ships were moving. One, the Emo, was on its way to New York to collect relief supplies for the people of Belgium. The other, a French vessel named the Mont Blanc, was entering the harbour, loaded with massive quantities of munitions and explosives. Despite warning whistles, the two captains moved their ships into the same place at the same time, and the larger ship, the Emo, sliced into the Mont Blanc, causing a fire on board. As the crew of the Mont Blanc abandoned ship, Haligonians of all ages gathered on the waterfront to watch the spectacle of a ship on fire. All kept watching, as other parts of the city had no idea of what was going on in the north end part of the harbour. At 4 minutes after 9 on the morning of December 6, 1917, it exploded, causing the largest man-made explosion in a populated area before the dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan. 2 square miles of the north end of the city were knocked down by the explosion. Wood and coal-burning stoves that had been used to heat the morning breakfast set the houses on fire. A tidal wave created by the blast washed people off the streets and drowned them in the harbour. The Mont Blanc itself blew up into the air into pieces like shrapnel and rained down on the crowd. A mile and a half away from the site of the explosion, they would find a cannon from the Mont Blanc. 2¼ miles in the opposite direction of the explosion, they would find part of the anchor of the Mont Blanc. 2,000 people were killed, 9,000 people were injured, and of a population of 60,000 at the time, 25,000 were left homeless the winter of 1917. The night of disaster, a fierce winter snowstorm would bury many people in the ruins of their homes. Word was sent out along the railway lines, "No time to explain, casualties enormous, send help." Small towns and villages in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick would start to organize relief. The same message asking for help was received by the governor of Massachusetts at the State House in Boston. He sent word he was sending help. 2 days after the explosion, having dug themselves through snowdrifts in New Brunswick and Maine, arrived the Massachusetts State Guard Medical Unit, quickly followed by a medical train from the state of Rhode Island, one from the state of Maine, the city of New York, and the Boston Red Cross. 105 American doctors and over 300 American nurses were quickly in Halifax to look after the 9,000 injured people. On seeing the devastation, they sent word back that Halifax needed a lot of help. The mother country, England, Great Britain, would send £1 million. But what surprised Haligonians was the amount of money they sent from the United States of America. The state of Massachusetts alone sent $250,000 for the relief of Halifax. A Texas barber sent $10 collected in his shop. An American soldier working in the ruins of Halifax would write a poem about what he had seen. The last verse of his poem summed up the American help. It said, "We weep with you, Halifax, in this your hour of sorrow. We offer you our help in gold, so don't wait till the morrow. Just wade right in and help yourself, and we the bill will pay, for that's the way we do things in the good old USA." Halifax would continue on with the First World War effort and recover from the disaster. Eventually, memorials would be put in churches, on street corners, and a large bell tower erected to remember the dead and those who survived. Halifax went on with war effort, serving again in World War II and other conflicts around the world. Winston Churchill visited Halifax twice during World War II and said with all the convoys leaving Halifax harbour, "We were the wharf of North America." Later, his statue would be unveiled by the Queen Mother. Another feature in Halifax, from the Scottish people who came, are 5-sided dormers in attic rooms. These are called Scottish dormers. There are actually 3 windows and 2 walls. And in an urban setting, you can look across the street at your neighbor or out the side to on either side. Scottish dormers, Victorian architecture, are some of the pleasant things you'll discover in Halifax. There are streets that are registered heritage streetscapes, showing a wide variety of styles. We have rough edges like everywhere else. And we battle bureaucrats and politicians to preserve our heritage. Halifax and Nova Scotia are known for the variety of colors we like to put on our homes. Less than an hour's drive from Halifax is the scenic South Shore. A highlight of the South Shore is Peggy's Cove, an area carved out by the Ice Age, leaving bare granite outcroppings sprinkled with smaller rocks of many shapes and sizes called erratics. In one section, from the water, sailors saw rocks that looked like the backs of whales coming out of the ground, and the area is now known as the Whale's Back. There are two stories of how Peggy's Cove got its name. For the logical thinker, it is simply the cove at the end of one side of St. Margaret's Bay, and since many Margarets are nicknamed Peggy, there's the name. The other story given is more romantic and comes from legends of shipwrecks. With over 4,000 miles of coastline, and the fact that Nova Scotia lies out in the Atlantic Ocean, there have been many shipwrecks in our history and on our shores. It is said one of those wrecks, local fishermen were able to save one young woman named Margaret. Having lost everything, she decided to stay with the kind people of the area and married a local fisherman who affectionately called her Peggy, and they settled in a little cove. When boats would pass with local fishermen, they'd like to tell strangers the story, "Oh, there's Peggy's Cove. Let me tell you her story." Still a working fishing cove, there are less than 70 residents, none of whom claim to be related to Peggy. Every summer, thousands of visitors come to Peggy's Cove to enjoy the sea, the lighthouse, and the good food in local restaurants. Traveling in any direction along the rugged coastline of Nova Scotia, one discovers many romantic legends, retold in stories and song.
Farewell to Nova Scotia, the sea-bound coast. Let your mountain dark and dreary be. For when I'm far away on the briny ocean tossed, will you ever heave a sigh and a wish for me?
Not all of Nova Scotia is rugged coastline. There are many fertile farming areas, small towns with historic churches and houses. Uniacke House, built in 1813 and now a museum, is an excellent example of a stately Georgian mansion. Leading into the Annapolis Valley region, the road is still guarded by the oldest blockhouse in Canada. Established in 1750, Fort Edward is found in the town of Windsor, where the Haliburton House is open to the public to remind us of one of the fathers of North American humor, Judge Thomas Chandler Haliburton. A judge by profession and writer by passion, he created a character named Sam Slick, who had sayings such as, "It's raining cats and dogs," "The early bird gets the worm," "Fact is stranger in fiction," all popular sayings of the early 1800s. The Bay of Fundy region is known for its tides. At Grand Pre, Acadians were able to dike the land as the tide went out, creating a large meadow, or Grand Pre. Here, the Acadians would learn the news of their expulsion in 1755. Today, the area has been preserved as a park with a memorial church and is a place where Acadians returned to find their roots. A statue of Evangeline commemorates the poem by Longfellow, which told the story of lost love and the search for those separated in this terrible time. The Acadians wandered for years, some ending up in Louisiana and called Cajuns. Today, they return to Grand Pre to celebrate their survival and the joy of life. Though the Acadian expulsion was tragic, Nova Scotia welcomed thousands of settlers in the 1800s. In 1928, Pier 21 opened its doors, and over time, 1 million immigrants came to Canada. We continue to welcome thousands of visitors a year. We hope you enjoyed these glimpses of our past and present. Historic Halifax and the byways of Nova Scotia await your next visit.